So we are now.
Yoma now.
I meant to say Yoma. We are now on Daf Chavtes Amid Beis. And we began on Chavtes Amid Beis yesterday a sugya of Klishares. And the question is whether Klishares is Makadesh Shelo Bizmano. And in the case of a kmitza of a korban mincha b'layla, we quoted a brisa that requires sreifa. There's no way that you can take this kmitza and put it back and mix it together to create the isa, what we call tevel, together with the shirayim, because once you place the komets into a klisharis, even b'layla, even shelo bizmana, it does engender a kiddush lipsul. And now we're going to learn a sugya, a mishnah in Menachos with regard to lechem haponim. And we're going to see from that mishnah that there is no din of klishares being makadesh shelo bizmana, even for psul. And we mentioned yesterday as an introduction to this mishnah in Menachos that the lechem haponim was placed on the shulchan in 2 rows of 6 each on Shabbos, and the bazichin were containers for the levona that were placed right near these lines, these turim of lechem mishnah, and the levona was then burnt on the mizbeach, and that haktara of the levona on the mizbeach was makadesh the lechem haponim. That was our introduction of yesterday. Haktara salavona hi hamakadeshes es halechem. Once that happens, then a week later, in other words, you put the lechem haponim on the shulchan in those 2 rows on Shabbos number 1, we'll call it, and the levona is placed there on Shabbos number 1. A week later, on Shabbos number 2, we will be maktir the levona, and now the lechem haponim becomes mutter lachila for the kohen, and that's based on the pasuk v'aisal lechem laskara ishel Hashem, and then the kohenim will eat the lechem haponim. Masir Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera is now going to quote a mishnah in Menachos to prove that the kli sharis is not makadesh lifsal from the following mishnah. See there as halechem es habazichim achar Shabbos. Instead of setting up the lechem haponim on the shulchan and the bazichin with the levona on Shabbos, they delayed it till Sunday. The hikter es habazichin b'Shabbos, and a week later they were maktir the bazichin, which under normal circumstances would be makadesh the lechem if the lechem had been placed that previous Shabbos on the shulchan, but it wasn't placed on the shulchan. We need that the lechem will sit on the shulchan for a full 7 days from Shabbos to Shabbos, but he placed the lechem on the shulchan on Sunday, so he's only got 6 days. Is therefore psula when he's maktir the bazichin on the following Shabbos, meaning 6 days later, psula. In other words, the entire process now is possible. But Ketzad Yasa, the Mishnah continues and says that you could, had they done it right, which he's now going to recommend how to do it right, they could have circumvented the problem, and we wouldn't have to passel the lechem haponim. What could they have done? Ketzad Yasa, yanichenu l'Shabbos haba. Instead of taking the lechem off the shulchan 6 days later, we call it Shabbos number 2, they could leave the lechem for another week, for Shabbos number 3, if you will, and on that Shabbos, they can now do whatever they have to do, and they'll be maktir the bazichin of the levona, and then they can give out the lechem aponim to the kohanim, and everything is fine and then the kohanim are allowed to eat the lechem. Now, the chiddush here of this Mishnah is that since the lechem aponim were now on the shulchan from Shabbos number 2 to Shabbos number 3, a full 6 days from Shabbos to Shabbos, therefore the aktaras habazichim will be makadesh the lechem and everything is kosher v'yosher. Even though the lechem was initially placed on a Sunday, which is shelo kemitzvaso, shelo kehogen. And that doesn't bother the Mishnah. We don't see any chisaron here that would passel the lechem aponim by virtue of the fact that they were placed on the shulchan on the wrong day. What I mean by the wrong day is that Sunday is like Lila in the case of a kometz, in the case of a mincha. Here, Sunday in anticipation of Shabbos, because we're going to need that the lechem aponim be on the shulchan from Shabbos to Shabbos, the second Shabbos to the next Shabbos. It's hafilu omda ala shulchan yom rabim ein b'kach klum. Even though there's an extra 6 days from Sunday to Shabbos, which is totally extraneous, totally an add-on, unnecessary, in which the lechem aponim were sitting on the shulchan. V'amai, how could this be a recommendation to be machshir the lechem aponim? Ikdosh v'tipasel. The shulchan is a classic klei shares, and we said that a klei shares, even shelo bizmano, like the case of a kometz that was placed b'layla into a kli shares, the kli shares has the power to engender a kiddush lipsul. So therefore, tikadesh v'tipasel. And this is all, if you remember, Aviv Shel Rabbi Avin, who said that a kli shares is makadesh, even shelo bizmano li pasel. The shulchan should be makadesh the lechem li pasel on that Sunday. Why? Because when he put the lechem on the shulchan on that Sunday, the lechem should be miskadesh al yodo shal shulchan, and once it's shelo bizmano, you have a kiddush of shelo bizmano, it should be pasel. How can you salvage the situation by leaving the lechem aponim on the shulchan for the following Shabbos and the one after in order to get your full 7 days? There was already a kiddush l'psul when the lechem was placed on the shulchan on that Sunday, 6 days premature. Omar Rava, mandika mosiv, shapir kamosiv. Whoever raised this question, this objection to Aviv Shel Rabbi Avin, it's a very, very nice kasha from the Mishnah of Lechem Aponim. But Avua de Rabbi Avin nami masnisa kama. But right, Avua de Rabbi Avin had a brisa. In other words, we're not going to completely reject Aviv Shel Rabbi Avin based on a Mishnah in Menachos because we have a brisa. Ein lanu lifrok dvara b'divrei Mishnah. Why? Because he has a brisa. He, Avud Rabbi Oven, was interpreting the brisa, and that he has a right and a responsibility to do so. And we don't need to reconcile Aviv Shel Rabbi Oven with this Mishnah Menachos, because Rabbi Oven is telling us, when I say Rabbi Oven, I mean Aviv Shel Rabbi Oven, he's telling us Shatna Brisa. And if the Mishnah contradicts the Brisa, so be it. And let's now understand what the issue at stake is. Why is it that in the case of Kiddush Lechem al Shulchan on a Sunday, which is Mechusar Zman, it's before the time period because we have to wait till next Shabbos for the Lechem Aponim. Why doesn't that generate a kiddush l'psul? Whereas in the case of kometz balayla, it does generate a kiddush b'psul. So he says the following, that everybody, all the Tanoim would agree that if it's mechusas man, then the klisharis is not makadosh. But kasavar, that Tana, the author of the Brisa of Aviv Shel Rabbi Ovin, who says that when you place the kmitza, the kometz, into a klisharis, balayla, is he holds that the reason why the klisharis is makadesh is because laila eino mechusas man. We'll try to understand. Again, let's review. Both the Tana of the Mishnah in Menachos and the Tana of the Brisa of Kmitza, the Mishnah Menachos with regard to Lechem Aponim and the Brisa with regard to Kmitza and a Mincha, both agree to the principle that Mechusas Man is the Kli is not Makadesh. What you did before this man is meaningless, even though you put it into a klisharis. It's premature. However, the question is Lila. Here's where the Brisa pipes up and says that Lila is not considered mechusas man. Sunday to Shabbos is mechusas man. So in the case of the Lechem Haponim, you have a mechusas man, and therefore there's no power in the Shulchan as a klisharis to be makadesh, even lipsul, as far as these Lechem Haponim, and we'll wait to start the process with this Lechem Haponim in a week from now. And it was a miracle in the Mikdash that it didn't spoil, it didn't get stale. But in the case of Lila, the Brisa maintains that that's not called mechusas man. Why is Lila not called mechusas man, and Sunday for Lechem Haponim is called mechusas man? So I'm going to quote to you a summary of both Rashi here and Rashi in Masechet Menachos. And this has to do with the halacha that halayla holech achar hayom, which means that if the day itself is called zmano, then the laila is schlepped along, and it's also called zmano. In other words, we're going to view the entire day as an entity of time that begins, the kickoff is Balayla. And therefore, Davar shezmano bayom eino nechshav mechutz zman Balayla. Why? Because hayom bali achar alayla. The day is the continuation of Laila. The entire entity of a day is comprised of the Laila and the Yom that follows. Therefore, the Indian Kiddush B'Kli Shares, Mincha Shenikmitza B'Laila, Kevan Shebiyom Shaliachrav Yezman HaKmitza. This night precedes the day of Kmitza, Zman HaKmitza. Ein bo ze din shel mechusas man. Umiskadesh hakometz hanitan b'kli shares kiddush l'psul. And now there's a Chal Shem kmitza kometz that can never be reversed, and you cannot put it back and combine it with the shirayim. Aval yom, but with regard to something of yom, that every day is a separate entity, and we need a certain day for the hakrava, or in the case of of Lechem Haponim, for the hanocha al gabi hashulchan, is yom with regard to tomorrow is mechusas man, and therefore there's no kiddush b'kli shares. So in the case of Lechem Haponim, that was placed in the shulchan, in the kli shares on Yom Rishon on a Sunday, the ein zmano ad l'Shabbos liachrom, until 6 days later on Shabbos. That's when the zman of hanochas lechem haponim al shulchan is. Ein hashulchan mekadsha. That's clearly mechusas zman. V'eino nifsal, it doesn't become puzzle. It still remains kosher, and the kiddush will take place next Shabbos. So in effect, when you put the lechem haponim on the shulchan on a Sunday, that action has no significance whatsoever, because there's no such thing as lechem haponim being placed on the shulchan on a Sunday. The halacha doesn't recognize that at all. So to take it from us now, what would be if he put the lechem haponim on Friday night? It would come out according to the sugya that since the Laila and the Yom flow together and integrate into one entity of time, therefore it's not called Mechusas Man. And there would be a kiddush of the Shulchan as a Klishares even on a Friday night, even though that's not the time for Hanocha of the Lechem Haponim. But if the Lechem Haponim was placed a day before, and how much more so 6 days before the Shabbos, then we're talking about Mechusas Man, and the action of placing the lechem haponim on the shulchan is a meaningless action. It's what we call a Masechet Yoma. It's just like a monkey put the lechem haponim on the shulchan. So what? So therefore the shulchan is being kaddish the lechem, and that's called a bona fide mechusas man, and there's no kiddush b'kli sharis. The brisa which we interpreted in the case of Kmitza B'Laila, that there is a kiddush of Kmitza vis-a-vis Psul, that's because the Laila and the Yom are considered in Hilchas Manim to be one integral entity. Now the Gemara asks the following kasha. If you're telling me that Laila, before the day, is not called Mechusas Man because it's all part of one day, and the day itself is this man of the Karban, then according to this, the lechem is not possible because the shulchan is not makadish it when it was yom lifnei zman, a full day before it. And how much more so in the case where it was placed 6 days before the zman. So the Gemara asks, l'chol hapachas, at least ki moti beis shimshei tikdosh v'tifsal. Now, if you're telling me the Laila is part of the day, then when you put the Lechem Haponim on Sunday, when we get to Friday night, and that night is part of the day, then Tipasal, at that point, since the Lechem is prematurely placed on the Shulchan, now, since it's not called Mechusas Man, because it's the Friday, then in such a case, the lechem haponim should certainly be possible. It's not mechusas man, and the shulchan is mekadesh lifsa. Amar Ravina answers shekadam misilko. The case that is addressed in the Mishnah in Menachos is a very unique scenario. We have to add a new kimta. What happened there in the Mishnah in Masechet Menachos on Erev Shabbos? 6 days after he had placed the lechem haponim on the shulchan on a Sunday, he removed the lechem haponim that Friday night, and therefore wasn't munach al gabi shulchan, and therefore the shulchan was not mekadesh, because the shulchan could only mekadesh that which is on top or inside the shulchan, or inside the klisharis. So then, when did he put it on? When did he place the lechem haponim onto the shulchan? That was in the daytime of Shabbos. And that's the second round for this lechem haponim. But the first round was on a Sunday. And it take you bridge it from Sunday till Friday. That's nothing. That's mechusas man. Every day is a separate unit, and it's mechusas man. But he made sure to remove the lechem haponim on the night of Shabbos, so that there would be no kiddush b'midin zmano, that we said that there's a kiddush kli in zmano to pasel a korban, but that kli could not operate and be makadesh that which is not located inside. It has to be located inside the kli. He took it off. Very smart Kohen. See, some Kohanim are very smart. And what he did was he removed the lechem haponim the night of Shabbos and replaced it the morning. And by doing so, the kli meaning the shulchan could not effectuate, could not be makadesh the lechem. Itema Rav Ashi Yomar. Now the Gemara has another possibility to replace Ravina. It's either Mar Zutra or Rav Ashi as an alternative. Afilu tema b'shlo karav v'silko. I can explain this Mishnah Menachos even in a case where he left the Shtei Lechem all 6 days, up until and including Shabbos. So Friday night, the Lechem Apanim is on the Shulchan. And now, since it's Kodem Zmano, we should apply the principle of Klishares Makadosh Lifsal. So Gemara says, Kevon shesidro shalokim mitzvaso. We don't care about the fact that the lechem is now on the shulchan on Friday night. What determines the status of the lechem is the hanacha, the original placing of the lechem upon him on the shulchan. And therefore, kevon shesidro shalokim mitzvaso is nasa kamoshe sidro akov. Since the original Sidur or Hanacha of the Lechem Aponim was on a Sunday, which is, as we said, Mechusar Zman, it doesn't bother me if the Lechem Aponim, says Rav Ashi, is actually on the Shulchan on Friday night. Why? Because the status of the Lechem Aponim is determined not by now, when the reality is that the Lechem Aponim is on the Shulchan, but rather by the Hanacha at the moment in which the Lechem Aponim was placed on the Shulchan. And if it was placed on the shulchan b'mechusar zman, the shulchan is not makadesh, and there's no psul. Nasa k'moshe sidro hakov. This is a very famous Gemara because all over the place they use the term kemaisa kov bi'alma, meaning when an action has no halachic significance whatsoever. I remember one of my rebbeim once said that reading the ksuba under the chuppah is a Maisa Kov. What he meant to say is that it has no significance. We only read the ksuba in order to make a hefsek between the first set of brachas and the second set of brachas, so that we can drink the kos of the first set of brachas and then have a separate bar priya gofer on the second kos. So we need a hefsek. You could have taken the Wall Street Journal and read the head article on the Wall Street Journal, but we have a minute of reading out the ksuba. It could be that reading the ksuba has other, allusions and hints and meanings, but it's primarily a Maisa Kol. Turn on a tape recorder. He got in trouble for saying this because they took it as an insult to the women folk. The question was, in our modern society, Torah in motion and all that stuff, though, they wanted to give the women the ability to read the ksuba under the chuppah. So it might be a tznius issue, I don't know. So that Rebbe said, well, what's the problem? You want to have a woman read the ksuba? The Maisa Kov. So they thought that he was comparing a woman to a kov. Although the Gemara does say that the Zohar says that you should see another woman as a kov. She's not attractive to you. But anyway, so that's what he said. But that's the phrase Maisa Kov. So the Gemara is telling me that in a situation of placing something into a kli sharetz, Shalo b'zmano kodem zman mechusar zman. That's a Maisa Kov. It has no halachic significance whatsoever, and it cannot effectuate a process of kiddush. And therefore, the Gemara says this is not a nesina. And when he puts the lechem upon him onto the shulchan on a Sunday, the shulchan cannot be makadosh the lechem, even if the lechem remains stationary on the shulchan into the zman, meaning onto Friday night, which we said is the beginning of the zmano. Nevertheless, it is not makadesh the shtei lechem. You have to take off the lechem from the shulchan and set it up on the shulchan b'zmano on the morning of Shabbos, and then the shulchan will be makadesh the lechem, such that with the aktoras habezichin of the levona, that would allow the kohanim to eat the lechem aponim. But in the case of kometz, get back to that primary case of kmitza v'mincha b'layla. Therefore, since we defined that Laila is not called mechusar zman and hayom holech achar Laila, Therefore, the Nesina is a meaningful halachic Nesina. It's not a Maisa Kov. And therefore, the Kiddush of that Kometz is effectuated by the Kli Shares, and the Mela, that Mincha becomes a Mincha Psula. And that Rabbosai is a siyum of sorts of that long, complicated sugya about Kli Shares. And now we go back to our Mishnah. And the Mishnah establishes that a Kohen who urinates requires Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, which is a process by which he cleans his hands and his legs in the kiyar. So the Gemara says, Bishlei Meraglayim, I understand that if a person urinates, he has to clean off his legs, because it's quite common that some of the urine, the drops of urine, will fall on his legs. Eliyadayim my timer. Why does he need Kiddush Yadayim? Why do we assume that there's urine on his hands? Amar Rabbi Abba, Zoso Meres, and now we're going to turn to Daf Lamed. Mitzvah l'shavshe. What it means is that when a person urinates and he's got meraglayim on his legs, then he is obligated to clean off the meraglayim. And very often he would do so by wiping the meraglayim with his hands. And his hands, because of their contact with the meraglayim, they need to be cleaned. As we said, put the yadayim inside the kiyah. So we need kiddush, not only raglayim, but also yadayim. Why? Because mitzvah l'shavshe. All right. Now, it's very interesting when it says mitzvah. I looked in the Torah, there are quite a few mitzvahs in the Torah. It doesn't say mitzvah l'shavshe. This is only a rabbinic institution, but it seems like the Rabbanan upgraded it to the status of a mitzvah. And we have cases where the Rabbanan can generate a mitzvah. Like, for example, Adlakas Ner Shabbos is called a mitzvah, or Hanukkah, or Megillah reading. These are called a mitzvah, or even Atilas Yadayim itself is a mitzvah by virtue of Takanas Chacham. So the word mitzvah as a term is used to encompass not only a mitzvah shel Torah, but even a mitzvah which is a Takanas Chacham. So Gemara says, Mesayeh alei l'Rabbi Ami. Based on our Mishnah, we can prove the ruling of Rabbi Ami. The Omer Rabbi Ami, Asur li Adam sheyetze, when a person leaves a Beis HaKisei, he's not allowed to leave b'nitzotzo shal gabi raglov. He's got to make sure to guarantee that he clears off any drops of urine from his legs. Mipnei, why do they make such a takana? Shenira kikrus shfacha or shavcha. Now, in the case of a krus shavcha, the reason why, or I shouldn't say the reason, but the siman l'davar, the manifestation of a krus shavcha, is nitzotzos, meaning a person whose urinary tract functions properly, the urine has a flow to it. But in the case of a krus shavcha, it drops down his body without flowing. There's no kiluach, what's called in Hebrew. And if this man walks out of the Beis HaKisei and he's got droplets of urine on his legs, people are going to start thinking, again, I don't know who's looking at him, I can't answer that question, but whoever sees these droplets is going to suspect that maybe he is a krus shavcha. Now, krus shavcha is not allowed to get married because he's incapable of bearing children. This man is already married. But the word is going to get out that he is a krus shavcha. They don't know exactly when he became a krus shavcha, but he has children from his wife. And people are going to assume that this is called Laz. They're going to start murmuring that his children are not his children. They came from a extramarital relationship. They are mamzerim. Umotzi Laz al banav shehei mamzerim. So the takana was made that when you walk out of a Beis HaKisei, guarantee yourself that there are no droplets of urine on your legs. And now, in the case of a Kohen who's serving in the Beis HaMikdash, he cannot operate and perform the avoda if he has the tinuf, the repulsive, disgusting filth of urine on his legs. Okay, if that only justifies the requirement of Kiddush Raglayim, why does it have to be Kaddish Yadayim? And the answer is we assume that he was Meshafsheh B'Yadayim, which is a halachic takana requirement to be Meshafsheh B'Yadayim, so that therefore we assume his Yadayim are also mitunafos with Meiraglayim. And now we get up to a sugya. It's a little bit of a difficult sugya to talk about sometimes, but in Chazal and the Gemara they're not nispal from these things. So to them it's it's pure Torah, pure halacha. So now the question is whether a person is allowed to recite Kriyat Shema or maybe Tefillah as well. We'll see after he makes a gedolin. He may have excrement, he may have soa that was not cleaned off of his anal opening. If he did not successfully remove all of the soa after he had a bowel movement, then he's not allowed to recite Kriyat Shema because his body is considered filth by the tzoa. Now, today we have more sophisticated ways of cleaning ourselves after a bowel movement, and you have, you can use this. I can give you many different possible methods. But back in the time of Chazal, it was quite possible that he wasn't successful at cleaning off the tzoa. So there may have been a little bit of tzoa that was left there, and therefore he's not allowed to read Kriyat Shema. Hechi Dami. Gemara says, wait a minute. Does he see it or does he not see it? Either Neres, if there's a small particle of tzoa that you can see with your eyes that's stuck in the what's called the piyat habas, the anal opening. So it's not something that's inside the body, it's outside the body. It's pshita. I don't need Rav Papa to tell me this chidush. In fact, even if you didn't go to the bathroom, you didn't have a bowel movement, if you go within a certain close proximity of excrement, you're not allowed to recite Kriyat Shema. How much more so if it's attached to your own body and it's nires? It's something that's visible to the eye. But v'ita lo nires, which means that it is trapped in the anal opening in such a way that you can't see it on the outside. It's caught in the membrane itself, in the muscle itself. Is lo nit Torah lemalach hasharetz. Malach hasharetz don't need bowel movements. They don't have bowel movements. They eat angel food. Angel food doesn't create excrement. So therefore, the Torah is given to human beings that have to go to the bathroom. And that's the way God created us. And we get rid of all our impurities. And if he can't see this piece of tzoa that Rav Papa is worried about, what are you considering a malach hashares? And you're telling us that he can't read Kriyat Shema? Is lo tzricha, the Gemara says, what's the case of Rav Papa? The Yoshev v'niris omed v'yenu niris. That if he's in a standing position, the tzoa is sort of sucked into his body, even though it's there, and then we don't consider it halachically to be tzoa. That's not something that we consider you malach hasharis, that you're able to, to consider yourself in a state of tinuf because there is tzoa that's trapped in the opening of your body. But if he sits down, when you sit down and the muscles contract, then as a result, it pushes the excrement out of the bowels. And that becomes a problem even when he's standing. What do I mean? If it's nimtza tzoa b'piyat tabas, and kasher yoshev, if he would be sitting, he would be able to see the excrement because, as we said before, that pushes the excrement out. is then omed v'eno nires, even though while he's standing, before he sits down, it is sort of closed. So is closed in the Piyat Habas in such a way that he cannot see it. Nevertheless, says Rav Papa, also likros kach. If that's, again, you would have to figure out how you know this, but if you feel the tzoa there and you realize that if you would be sitting down, the tzoa would be pushed, then even though you're standing, you're not allowed to read Kriya Shema. But before Rav Papa, I would have thought, well, what do you mean I'm standing? Right now it's Eino Nires. Don't tell me about the potential. Right now it's Eino Nires. And Rav Papa says, no, you can't read Kriya Shema. Why? Because since it's already at the position, it's almost Nires, it's almost exited from the body, that if you would sit down and be pushed out, then even though you're in the state of Amida, then you're allowed to read Kriya Shema. And I'll just end with a mention of a tshuva from the Maram Rutenberg, and he writes that im yesh tzoa b'piyat habas v'eno nires lachutz klal is mutter likros. Okay, so Bli Neder on Yom Rishon will go into some of the details of this Maram Rutenberg. But let me take this opportunity to wish everyone a great Shabbos, Parshas Parah, and Mirz Hashem, I'll see you on Yom Rishon.
Isn't she? I thought Chief Shoup was actually shaking the member, not so that there wouldn't be the little T-buzz that got off onto the legs afterwards.
No, that's not what we're discussing here. The word shif could have many meanings. It just means rubbing. Here it means rubbing the legs in order to remove any residue of urine.